Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest is Louise Digby. She's a registered nutritional therapist, a women's weight loss expert, and a founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. So we're going to talk about how people can balance their hormones in the right way, and especially when they get to be over 40, how to deal with stubborn weight that won't go away. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Tell me a bit about your background.
So I started practicing nutrition back in 2012. And when I graduated, I started working with everyone and anyone, and anyone who had any sort of problem, whether that was IBS or depression or skin issues or you name it really. And I kind of ended up going into weight loss, and specifically weight loss for women in that mid stage of life, because it's an area where there seemed to be a lot of struggle, a lot of misinformation, and an area where I kind of saw women working so hard to, and pretty much starving themselves to try and get the weight off and just not getting any success at all. So I kind of saw that as a bit of a puzzle that I wanted to figure out, and so have dedicated the last, 6-7 years of my practice really focusing on that and digging into the research and developing the realization that there is an awful lot more to weight loss than just how much you eat and how much you exercise.
So what are some of the things that women are doing wrong, and what can they change? Like, how do they tweak their workout so that it works better in their nutrition?
I think in terms of what people are doing wrong, often it's what we've been told to do. So we've been told that the way to lose weight is to eat less, count calories, do some sort of diet, and burn as many calories as possible. And that does work when you're in your 20s, early 30s, and, it can work quite effectively. But when you're in this mid stage of life, really after the age of 35, 40, into your 50s, it just doesn't work as well, because more often than not, the problem isn't just to do with overeating or under-exercising. It's more to do with changes in hormones, changes in muscle mass, a lifetime of suboptimal nutrition, and it could be to do with imbalances in the gut and inflammation and other underlying imbalances that impact the way that metabolisms work. And actually, the traditional approach of exercising more and eating less can make things worse because of the stress that it puts on our bodies and how it deprives us of nutrients, and also can accelerate the muscle loss that happens after the age of 35, particularly if you're not getting the right nutrition in alongside the exercise that you're doing.
Why do you think this happens? Is it very dramatic in late 30s, or is it not until late 40s that it's more dramatic? And what does this look like if it's done wrong? What happens to the person when they come to you and they've been doing things wrong? What kind of complaints or symptomology will they have?
In terms of complaints, the thing that pretty much everyone that I work with says to me is that I've been doing everything. I've tried everything. I'm eating way, way less than I was. I'm exercising way more than I ever was. And, I'm trying to eat clean. I've tried different diets and it's just not working. So that is like one of the key things that, there's a sign that there's something more going on. But often it does come paired with other changes. And for women, it's often changes to do with their hormones, and going into perimenopause and menopause, you start to notice changes in your moods, in how regular your menstrual cycle is. It could be that you kind of got all sorts of random symptoms popping up. Some could develop acne. Some might have hair loss, or very dry skin or brittle nails. Constipation is another strong sign as well, because that can be a sign that your metabolism is slowing down and everything is slowing down in your body. Fatigue as well. If you have a fat burning problem, then you've also got an energy production problem, because we make our energy from our fuel, and that fuel could be our food, but it can also be our internal fat reserves. So a lot of women find that they just don't have as much energy as they used to, despite, going to the doctors and checking that their thyroid's functioning properly, checking that their iron's good and that they don't have deficiencies. It seems to be unexplained for a lot of people. So that can be a sign that there's an issue with your mitochondria. So the energy production, kind of like power factories, energy factories in pretty much every cell in our body. And that's essentially where we burn our fat and we burn our calories. So if we have issues in the mitochondria, then that can be one of the reasons why we can have such stubborn weight.
All right, so what's a typical protocol? How do you go about assessing what's truly holding someone back?
So everyone that we work with, the protocol is different, because although everyone comes with the same problem, they've all got different underlying causes or different histories that have led up to them developing these issues. So there isn't a one size fits all, but there are common themes. And so one of the things that we see so often is gut issues, and we run tests on our clients to identify where these imbalances are. And we so often see that there is a lack of beneficial bacteria in the gut, often an overgrowth of not so beneficial bacteria, often an overgrowth of yeast, and poor absorption of nutrients as well. And there could be some inflammation or some leaky gut, or also known as intestinal hyperpermeability. So issues in the gut are really common, and that has an impact on everything in your body. It impacts your brain chemicals, and that means that, it could give you more cravings, or it could make you less motivated, or it could make you feel low and more likely to seek food to pick you up and make you feel better. So the impact that it has on our brain is very significant in the weight loss journey. And then also what's going on in your gut impacts your hormones. So there are bacteria in the gut that can actually recycle our hormones, and we can end up reabsorbing those hormones that we have already eliminated. Rather than properly eliminating them when we have a bowel movement, we can end up reabsorbing them, which can contribute to hormone imbalance as well. And then there's...
Do you know which bacteria in the gut are responsible for recycling which hormones, or producing, serotonin, XYZ, other things like that?
Off the top of my head, no, because they've all got such long names that I've never gone through the effort of memorizing them. But there's various different ones that kind of impact you in different ways. Some to do with increasing your toxic load and therefore impacting your, how hard your liver's having to work. And then that impacts your hormones because your liver has to detox your hormones. So that's a whole other area is toxic load and exposure to pesticides and pollutants and parabens and all these environmental toxins that our body has to eliminate when we come into contact with them. And so the exposure to those toxins is disruptive to hormones because we eliminate our hormones via the same pathways as we have to eliminate a lot of these toxins. So that can be disruptive in that way as well.
All right. So what kind of testing do you do? Do you sequence the microbiome and look for a certain species prevalence, or how do you go about doing your work to help people?
So we really like doing organic acid testing. So it's a urine test, and the organic acids are basically produced in the body as a result of all the different processes that happen in the body. And by monitoring the organic acids, you can get a really good understanding of how your body is functioning. So it's a lot more insightful than just your typical blood tests that tell you, exactly what your levels are. That is helpful. But as well as that, it's really helpful to have tests that tell you how your body is functioning. And so with that, we look at gut health, the bacteria and the yeasts. We look at what's going on in the mitochondria and how well you're burning fats and proteins and carbs. So essentially your metabolism. And we also
how could you know any of that? How does the testing work to see any of that?
So,
an example, maybe one thing.
So when you are burning fat, let's say, there'll be byproducts that are produced from that process, and then we eliminate those byproducts via our urine. So that's the organic acid. And so we measure that organic acid, and then that helps us to understand how efficiently you might be burning fat, if it's, in the normal range, or if it's very high or very low. And that's the same for many other different processes in the body as well. And the important thing is to look at the patterns of all of these things rather than looking at the markers individually, because they don't mean a lot on their own. But when we look at the patterns of the related markers, we can get a really good idea of how efficiently you're burning fat and whether actually there could be something blocking your fat burning. And if there is something blocking your fat burning, it's often to do with the cofactors that are required for that chemical reaction to happen. So often those are vitamins and minerals, and we know kind of what vitamins and minerals are required at each stage of the chemical reaction. So which organic acid is elevated or low will help us to see which nutrients might be deficient or that you might have a greater requirement for than the average person.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Okay, so you do this testing, and then what, do you come up with a comprehensive plan that's geared towards that person only, or how does this work?
Yeah, exactly. So we do that testing. We also do it alongside a blood test that looks at the thyroid in a lot of detail and a few other markers like lipids and liver function. And then we bring all that together alongside medical history and symptomology and put together a targeted action plan that is specifically for that person. And that involves making tweaks to the diet. So that might be prioritizing certain foods. It might be minimizing certain foods. Lifestyle factors are important as well. So we might be looking at stress management, sleep quality, amount of time outside in the daylight. And then we also look at supplements as well to correct deficiencies or to support the rebalancing of certain systems.
Okay. So what kind of case studies do you have that were interesting to you or dramatic?
Yeah, so one springs to mind, which was a lady that came to me who she had been working with a personal trainer. She was really determined to get the weight off. So she'd been seeing a personal trainer 3 times a week, and she'd been following a diet called Slimming World. I don't know if you have it over there, but it's a diet over here in the UK. It's a very popular one, very similar to Weight Watchers. And she was following it very strictly and just not seeing any progress after spending, quite a few months working with her personal trainer. So she wanted to get some tests done, find out what was going on. And she was very skeptical. She wasn't really buying into the idea that there could be something more going on and there was more to it than calories and burning calories. But what we found with her tests was that firstly, her thyroid wasn't functioning as well as it could be. And what was interesting was the markers that the doctors typically assess, so T4 and TSH, they were completely normal. But on a more detailed test, where we also look at the free T3 and the free T4, so other thyroid hormones, we found that these weren't optimal. In fact, they were quite low. And so this is enough to cause weight loss resistance and fatigue. So that was a big factor. And then we also found that she had several inflammatory markers elevated. And again, the tests that her doctors had done had included markers for inflammation, but just one CRP marker, whereas we looked at other markers like high sensitivity, CRP and TNF alpha, and these were elevated as well. So she had significant inflammation going on in her body. And then also her blood sugars. So she'd been told that her blood sugars were normal. But again, rather than just looking at blood glucose, we looked at HbA1c, which is your average blood sugars over the past few months. And we also looked at fasting insulin, and these were also elevated. And we looked at lots of other things, but that were more normal. But these were the key things that came up. So we put together a plan where we were focusing on mostly supporting her blood sugars to start with, because if you can get your blood sugars balanced, then that really supports your thyroid function. So that involved things like making sure she was having enough protein, scaling back on the coffee a little bit because she was very into her coffee, making sure that she was eating mindfully and not rushing through her meals, which she had been doing before. And then we also wanted to make sure that her thyroid was being fueled properly. So the issue that she had with her thyroid hormones was that one hormone wasn't converting into the other. And so that can happen for a few different reasons. And so there's nutrients like selenium and zinc, which are really helpful for supporting that conversion. Supporting gut health really helps, and managing stress is a really big factor as well. So we kind of started there, as well as making various other tweaks to her diet, like making sure that she was optimizing her omega-3s and reducing down seed oils and kind of sources of omega-6s, because that can be pro-inflammatory if we've got those two things out of balance. So we did this over the course of 3 months, and we introduced one thing at a time because that's a lot to do all in one go. And what she found was that the weight started shifting. It didn't happen immediately, but after a few weeks, once we'd started to get things back into alignment, she started to see the weight shift finally. And she was losing a steady 1 to 2 pounds a week, which doesn't sound dramatic, but for her, it was massive because her weight had been so stubborn.
For anybody, that's a good healthy rate, That's
Really?
too much.
Definitely.
Well, what was the result after a few months besides the weight loss?
So she lost, I think it was 14 pounds. She lost 14 pounds after 3 months. And then she also got back in touch with me a year later, and she had lost, I think it was another 17 pounds. And so she sent me a picture, and she was back in this leather skirt that she had worn back when she was in her 20s. And this lady was almost 50 at the time. So, that was a massive win for her to be able to get back into something like that she'd had so long ago.
Well, in addition to that, what else changed? How did she feel? Where did this go?
Yeah, so she felt a lot more energized. She said that the brain fog lifted, and this is a really common symptom for women who are perimenopausal or menopausal, and it can be quite debilitating as well. So yeah, she found that the brain fog lifted, and that really made a difference to her. She just felt a lot more clarity of mind and motivated, and actually she went on to study nutrition because she was so inspired by what she'd learned and the changes that she'd seen. And I think things like puffiness. So a lot of women experience like quite a puffy face, particularly when they've got inflammation, and also puffy fingers as well, which can stop them getting their wedding ring on and that type of thing. So all the puffiness went down as well. So she could actually see the definition in her face, and she could get her jewelry back on as well.
Okay. Maybe one more story, or, an incredibly dramatic one, or a rewarding one that you remember?
Yeah, so in terms of a dramatic one, I had an email about a month or so ago from a lady that I worked with, again, about a year ago. And she said that she'd just hit her, I think it was 9 stone. It might have been 8, but I think it was 9 stone goal. And so there's 14 pounds to a stone in case anyone doesn't know that. So yeah, a lot of weight, considerable achievement. And so for her, she had a lot of issues with raised cortisol. And we did some tests. So she'd, again, had tests with her doctors to check her cortisol levels. But the tests that you have done at the doctors, they just do like a blood test that looks at one point in time, and they're looking for disease. Whereas what you need to detect a more subtle change in cortisol is ideally a saliva test or a urine test, but a saliva test I think is best over the course of the day and taking it at several points. So taking it as soon as you wake up and then a few hours later and then mid-afternoon and then before bed. And that helps us to see what the pattern is of the cortisol over the day. And this is really important because your stress hormone cortisol, it should be nice and high in the morning. It should kind of spike up quickly after we wake up, and then it should drop down steadily over the course of the day. And if that pattern gets skewed, then we can have trouble sleeping, we can have trouble with energy, and if it's very raised either constantly or at various points in the day, then that can contribute to stubborn weight as well, because cortisol is the way that it helps us to stay alert and prepared to tackle the stresses or the dangers is that it strips glucose from our muscles so that we've got lots of blood sugar and energy available. But with chronic stress, we don't need all that blood sugar and all that energy to kind of get through each stressor. And what ends up happening is we store that extra energy as weight around our middle. So that's what one of the problems that this lady had was that the weight around her tummy was really, really stubborn. And even when she did lose weight, she couldn't get it off her tummy. But also the other problem was that she just couldn't stick to anything. She was in a bit of a dieting cycle where, you know, she'd eat well for a few weeks and then she'd get bored and she'd fall off the wagon and put the weight back on and more. So the cortisol was a big factor in all of that. And she had various other things going on as well. She needed a little bit of support with her gut because the gut bacteria wasn't optimal. There was a lack of beneficial bacteria and then also some SIBO going on. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, although it was...
What about the cortisol? What do you do for that? I know there's like cortisol manager and some supplements you can take, but what can be done for high levels of cortisol versus the ones?
So there's lots you can do for high cortisol. Again, balancing blood sugars is really key because if we're having crashes and highs in our blood sugars, then that can drive up cortisol. So that's a really good place to start, balancing your blood sugars. And then when it comes to the stress side of things, we want to think about, if we can, reducing stresses. That's always easier said than done, but if there's anything that we can do there to reduce our stress, then great. But working on stress management is absolutely key as well. And so that can be, incorporating habits into your lifestyle, which are things that you enjoy or things that give you me time or downtime, which could be, something that takes a couple of minutes, or it could be something that you spend an afternoon doing or more. And then there's also things that you can do to actually try and almost like hack your system and put your body into rest and digest, which is the opposite of fight or flight mode. So those can be things like cold showers. Taking a cold shower makes all of your blood vessels constrict, and that helps to stimulate your vagus nerve, which helps to put you into that rest and digest mode. And that helps us to lower our cortisol. And then also things like deep belly breathing, that helps to do the same thing. Singing or humming, stimulating those vocal cords, again, stimulates the vagus nerve. So there's various things that you can do. And the key is to incorporate a couple of each of these types of things. Work on reducing the stress where you can, incorporate some habits to get more me time and time away from all the chores and the to-do list, and also little things that you can do anytime that will just help to put you back into that calm state. And then supplement-wise, this is, again, very individual. And, if you're taking medications, then you have to be very cautious. But a couple of supplements that are really great for supporting your body through a stress response are B vitamins and magnesium, particularly magnesium bisglycinate or magnesium taurate, glycinate. Those are all kind of better absorbed and better for the more stressful scenarios. And the reason why these are really helpful is because when we are under stress, particularly chronic stress, we really burn through particularly magnesium. And we have quite a high demand for both magnesium and B vitamins. And also when we're stressed, we tend to sleep less. We often rely on coffee a bit more. And those are both things that deplete your magnesium as well. So really important to get lots of magnesium in. And then there's adaptogens, which are things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil. They're really nice herbs that help to modulate the stress response. So, if your cortisol's high, it will help to bring it down a little bit. And even if your cortisol's low, it can actually help to bring it back into the normal range. But exercise caution.
If women are exercising a lot, which perhaps seems to be a commonality, why would they have problems with cortisol? The exercise, I would think, would trigger the stress relief response. When you're done exercising, you'd be calm and relaxed. So does that not happen, or does the mechanism get screwed up if other things are out of balance?
Yeah, so exercise definitely does have that calming impact. The endorphins are so good for us. But a lot of people, particularly women, will go for the intense cardio or the long sessions of cardio to try and burn as many calories as possible. And it's those extended periods of cardio that can actually drive up that stress response and raise your cortisol levels. I mean, it's normal for cortisol to go up a little bit after exercise, but if you're someone who is chronically stressed or sleep deprived, then it's going to raise those cortisol levels up even more, and they're not going to come back down to a healthy range. So what we find is that when we're working with women who are very stressed or very busy and never stop, then actually going for a more gentle type of exercise, a lower impact exercise like yoga, Pilates, swimming, walking, or just short bursts of cardio, and strength training particularly is great. This is much more effective because you're still getting the movement, but you're not driving up that stress response at the same time.
Oh, so if you do intense workouts, could it lead to a catastrophic event or no?
Not a catastrophic event unless you're doing really intense workouts and you've got a heart condition or something like that.
By just having high cortisol, though, could that trigger a heart attack or something if you work out really hard? Or it's not likely to do that?
Potentially, when we're talking about raised cortisol, we're more thinking about the impact it has on your body over a prolonged period of time. Because the problem isn't having increases in your cortisol. The problem is when it stays elevated for a long time, because it's very depleting on your body. It's very inflammatory, disruptive to your hormones, to your brain chemicals, to your sleep. And
have you seen anyone where it's reversed? Because cortisol is supposed to peak and trough on certain times in the circadian rhythm. Have you ever seen someone where it's the opposite? It's low when it needs to be high and vice versa. Why would that happen?
That's a good question. Why does it happen? I think there's quite a few reasons why it could happen. You often see it in shift workers or people that have worked shifts. Their kind of circadian rhythm gets messed up and it's back to front. And it can take a really long time to retrain your body to have the circadian rhythm run the right way, where the cortisol's high in the morning and low in the evening. And that kind of goes hand in hand with lack of exposure to daylight. And, for some people, it might not be that they're a night worker, but it could be that the type of job that they have means that they don't get much exposure to daylight. And in the evening, they are probably getting a lot of exposure to artificial light and blue light from devices and screens. So we know that exposure to blue light raises our cortisol levels. It raises our blood sugars. And so that can start to make the cortisol pattern kind of be back to front.
Okay. So you have seen it? Is it a common thing where you get this reversal, or is it pretty rare?
I haven't seen it an awful lot. It's not something that we test all the time. So we don't test the cortisol all that much. But yeah, it does happen. But yeah, not something that we see all the time. What we see more often is either a completely high across the board cortisol reading, high at every point in the day, or a complete flat line where it's low across the board. Or it could just be that it's just a bit too high at points, a bit too low at points. That's probably the most common pattern. But when you're at these extremes where it's extremely low all the time, then that's basically burnout. Your adrenals are not functioning as they should be.
When doesn't this work? All your advice, all your help, when does it fall flat and does not work? Is it because the person is just not telling you what they're really eating and doing? Or are there some cases that just no one can fix?
I think there's definitely an element of compliance. If someone isn't being honest about, and this might be being honest with themselves more about kind of how much they're they're eating or how much effort they're putting in, whether they are applying the recommendations or taking the supplements, probably that sort of thing. That does all make a difference. But sometimes when we struggle to get results, what we see is a trend of past trauma. Someone who might have had a traumatic experience in their past, which, could be a really big thing, or it could be a very small traumatic experience that can cause kind of like an internalized stress that we don't even know is there. And I've worked with women who have, a very kind of comfortable lifestyle. There's really no obvious source of stress, and yet they've still got all the symptoms of stress. And that's when we find that there could be some, traumatic experience that's influencing that. And so for someone like that, doing the work with a counsellor, a psychotherapist, could be the route to seeing the transformation in their health and in their weight.
Okay. And you serve people all over the United Kingdom, or, with online, can you serve people in other countries, or like what's the scope of your practice in terms of geography?
Yeah, so we work with people in the UK and in the US. We've recently started working with women in the US as well. We do all our program and consultancy online via Zoom and via like a private forum. And then all the testing can be kind of organised with labs that are local to the individuals. So yeah, the convenience of the modern world means that we can work with people all over the place.
Yeah, that's great. Just a couple more questions. Do you notice that women in the U.S. are very different from women in the U.K. in terms of like what they'll do, what they won't do, what their issues are? Is there any similarity or disparity amongst the groups that you can talk about?
I'd say it's probably early-ish days for me to be making comparisons because it's only been a month or two that we've been working with women from the US. But one thing that I've noticed so far is that the struggles are the same. And, despite different healthcare systems, the frustrations are the same. Most women feel that they are not being heard by their medical professionals. They're not being assessed properly. They're being kind of fobbed off, being told, oh, it's just your age. Oh, it's just menopause. You just need to deal with it. And most of them are just being told, oh, well, just try eating a bit less and exercising more, which they've all been doing anyway. So I think that's the common theme that I've seen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just have a feeling that the women in the U.S. would maybe listen to you guys more because you have such nice accents. But then again, the women in the U.K. would say, oh, the same accent as me, so maybe they would listen to me more. So I'm just curious. But I guess
yeah.
As it goes along.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is probably an element of that. I have been told not by clients from the US, but from other practitioners that I know who have said to me, oh, I think my clients would love you because you're British and we love the British.
If it helps to get them to comply and to feel heard, then why not? That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
One last question. So is there an age after which this gets a lot harder? Or, if you have menopause, or if you're in menopause and of a certain age, like, if you help women in their 60s, 70s, even 80, and again, is there an age where all this just gets dramatically more difficult, or a condition?
I would say that it's really as you near 50 that it gets considerably more difficult. And that's kind of why I do what I do, because it is such a challenge, and the traditional options that are out there, the typical diets, just don't cut it. They just don't do anything and often make things worse and aren't actually particularly good for you, even if they do get the weight off. So yeah, as you get to closer to 50, it seems to be a lot harder, because that's when basically your ovaries are pretty much done. They're pretty much done with producing your sex hormones and producing eggs. And that's a really big thing for your body. It's like going through puberty backwards, and that decline in hormones combined with the decline in muscle mass that we start having really from the age of 35 if we're not taking steps to maintain it. Both those things together, as well as all the other things that's probably going on for that woman, having probably children still at home, elderly parents who they might need to support, probably still working full time, and, possibly divorces, bereavements. There's a hell of a lot going on in this life stage, and your body is changing dramatically. So yeah, it's a really tough time, but I think it's about having the right support network, and also about having an intervention that's actually targeted to them and what their body needs, and focused on nourishing their body and taking care of it rather than depriving it and punishing it like your typical diets do.
Well, very good, Louise. No, thanks for explaining all this stuff and coming on. So how can people get in touch with you in the clinic? What are some resources for them?
So you can get in touch with me via my website, which is louisedigbynutrition.com. And you can also find me on socials. So you can search at Louise Digby Nutrition to find me on Instagram and Facebook. And you might also enjoy my podcast, which is The Thriving Metabolism, which you can find on any podcast platform.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really great.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.